When Chris Walker, a rising tech entrepreneur and longtime New Yorker, came home late one night, all he wanted was to unwind in the comfort of his condo. Little did he know that an ordinary evening would spiral into a public spectacle. Standing in the lobby of his high-rise was a woman who took it upon herself to act as the self-appointed gatekeeper of the building. Someone convinced it was her duty to question anyone who didn't fit her narrow perception of who belonged. Chris had just parked his car in the underground garage and walked to the main entrance, his mind focused on a presentation he needed to finalize for work. As he approached the glass doors, he noticed a woman standing inside, her eyes fixed on him with unsettling intensity. Brushing off her stare, he inserted his access card into the door scanner, only to find her stepping forward to block his path. "Can I help you with something?" Chris asked, his voice even but wary. "I don't think you live here," she said curtly, folding her arms and tilting her head as if daring him to challenge her. Her neatly styled hair and designer handbag gave her an air of privilege, one she wielded without hesitation. "I've never seen you before," Chris sighed, already sensing where this was heading. "I do live here. Unit 23B, in fact. I've been here for almost a year." He motioned toward his pocket. "I have my key card. If you'll excuse me, I'd like to go home." But she stepped sideways, continuing to block the entrance. "I think you're lying. People like you always have a story. What are you really here for? Deliveries? Loitering? Something worse?" Chris blinked, struggling to contain his growing frustration. "People like me?" he echoed. "I'm not sure what you mean, but I've got nothing to prove to you." "Move aside." Her face hardened. "If you're a resident, then you won't mind waiting here while I call building security. Let's get this cleared up." Chris glanced around. A few neighbors walked past, clearly noticing the tension but avoiding eye contact. Typical, he thought. No one wants to get involved. He took a deep breath and pulled out his driver's license, holding it up. "This has my name and address." Satisfied, she gave it a dismissive glance. "Could be fake," she said with a smirk, pulling out her phone. "If you're legit, you won't mind explaining it to the police." Chris felt his stomach twist. The thought of police involvement was unsettling, but he refused to let her see his unease. Calmly, he reached for his phone and began recording. "I'm documenting this, just so we're clear on what's happening." "Oh, go ahead," she sneered. "Post it online if you want. I'm doing my duty to protect this building." Before Chris could reply, she raised her pepper spray and unleashed a stream directly into his face. Pain shot through his eyes and skin as he stumbled backward, his phone barely capturing her smug expression. Moments later, the sound of sirens cut through the air, and Chris struggled to steady himself as two officers approached the scene. The woman immediately rushed to them, her voice shrill and commanding. "Thank goodness you're here. This man was trying to break into our building. I stopped him before he could do anything." Chris, still wiping his face, gestured toward the officers. "I live here. This woman assaulted me without cause. I have my key card and ID to prove it." One of the officers stepped closer, his expression neutral. "Sir, can we see your ID?" Chris handed it over, his hands trembling from a mix of anger and adrenaline. The officer examined it and nodded to his partner. "Let's verify this with building management." The woman scoffed, her confidence unwavering. "Why are you even checking? Just look at him. He doesn't belong here." But a call to the building office quickly confirmed Chris's residency. The officer turned back to the woman, his tone now firm. "Ma'am, his information checks out. He's a resident." Her face went pale. "There's no way. He must have faked it. I was just trying to protect the building." The officer shook his head. "You've made a serious mistake. Assaulting someone without cause is a crime. Mr. Walker, would you like to press charges?" Chris didn't hesitate. "Yes, I would." Her confident demeanor crumbled as the officers placed her in handcuffs. "You can't do this." "I was just doing my job," she protested, but her words fell on deaf ears as they escorted her to their squad car. Chris stood by, his eyes still stinging, but his resolve unwavering. One of the officers returned his ID and offered a quiet apology. "Sorry you had to go through this, sir. Unfortunately, we see situations like this more often than we'd like." Later that night, Chris uploaded the video to social media, detailing the ordeal in a calm, straightforward manner. Within hours, it went viral. People from all walks of life shared his story, condemning the woman's actions and calling out the systemic biases that enabled such behavior. The building's management reached out to apologize, offering to cover legal fees and provide additional security measures. Meanwhile, the woman faced public outrage and legal repercussions, her actions serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of prejudice. For Chris, the experience was both infuriating and illuminating. It underscored the challenges he faced even in spaces meant to be his sanctuary, but it also showed the power of standing firm and letting the truth speak for itself. As support poured in from across the country, he hoped his story would spark deeper conversations about bias and accountability, and maybe, just maybe, help prevent someone else from facing the same ordeal. Chris Walker's ordeal, though painful, became more than just a personal struggle. It evolved into a moment of reckoning for his community and far beyond. As his story gained traction, it ignited conversations across social media, news platforms, and within communities about the dangers of unchecked bias and entitlement. The incident became a rallying cry for those who had experienced similar injustices but never had the platform or opportunity to be heard. For Chris, however, the conclusion of the event was both empowering and sobering, offering a mixture of hope and lingering unease. In the days following the confrontation, Chris received an overwhelming outpouring of support. Strangers flooded his inbox with messages of encouragement. Neighbors who had previously remained distant came forward to express their regrets for not stepping in, and activists reached out to use his story as a tool for awareness. But amidst the positivity, Chris couldn't help but reflect on how the incident highlighted larger, deeply rooted societal problems. The encounter wasn't just about a single person's ignorance. It was a symptom of systemic issues that marginalized individuals faced every day. As Chris began to process what had happened, he took steps to ensure his experience wasn't just a fleeting moment of social media outrage. He connected with local advocacy groups and community leaders to explore ways to combat racial profiling and implicit bias in residential spaces. Together, they organized a series of community discussions aimed at fostering dialogue between neighbors and encouraging accountability from property management teams. These events were packed with residents, many of whom confessed to having witnessed similar incidents or admitted their own unconscious biases. The building management also took significant steps to address the incident. They updated their security policies, ensuring residents would never again face such harassment at their own front door. Additionally, they pledged to provide sensitivity training for all staff and encourage tenants to participate in workshops promoting inclusivity. For Chris, these measures were a small but meaningful step toward creating a safer environment for everyone. While Chris appreciated the community's efforts, the aftermath wasn't without its challenges. The woman who had confronted him, later identified as Sarah, faced legal consequences for her actions, including charges of assault and filing a false police report. Public backlash against her was swift and severe, with many online commenters relishing in her downfall. Though Chris believed accountability was necessary, he felt conflicted about the vitriol directed at her. Holding someone responsible doesn't mean destroying them. He remarked in an interview, "What happened to me was wrong, but I hope this becomes a learning experience for her and others, not just punishment." That sentiment resonated with many who followed his story. Chris's decision to focus on change rather than revenge elevated the narrative, making it about more than just one person's trauma. His ability to remain composed and articulate in the face of adversity turned him into a role model for resilience, sparking national discussions about how individuals and communities could address bias without perpetuating division. Chris's story also reached policymakers and organizations advocating for broader changes in housing and policing practices. Advocacy groups used the video he captured to push for legislation that would penalize false accusations and provide clearer guidelines for handling such situations. This isn't just about Chris, one advocate explained during a televised panel discussion. It's about creating environments where people don't have to justify their existence, where safety measures don't become tools of exclusion. On a more personal level, Chris's relationships with his neighbors transformed. Those who had previously avoided eye contact or kept their distance now engage with him in meaningful ways, sharing stories, expressing solidarity, and working together to build a more inclusive atmosphere. His condo building, once a source of isolation, began to feel like a true community. Months later, as Chris reflected on everything that had unfolded, he acknowledged the lasting impact of the incident. The sting of being unjustly profiled and attacked hadn't entirely faded, but he recognized that something powerful had emerged from the pain. His story had prompted awareness, sparked change, and brought people together in ways he hadn't anticipated. It wasn't the way he wanted to make a difference, but he had turned an ugly experience into an opportunity for progress. Chris also realized that his journey was far from over. Bias doesn't disappear overnight, he said during a speech at a community event. But every step we take toward recognizing it and addressing it brings us closer to a world where everyone feels like they belong. In the end, Chris's story became a testament to the strength of resilience and the power of truth. What started as an unjust confrontation outside his own home blossomed into a broader movement for accountability, empathy, and change. And while the road ahead would undoubtedly hold more challenges, Chris had proven that one voice, one moment, and one act of courage could spark a ripple effect that reached far beyond the boundaries of a single apartment building.